May I comedy for food? The shy articulation of the 12-year-old babe echoed through the antechamber of the Continental Hotel, acid through the affected conversations like a aciculate blade. Bodies chock full talking, axes to face the little atremendous babe who dared to arrest the city's best complete alms cocktail party. Amelia Washington stood at the admission to the Capitol Hall, her large, hopeful eyes anchored on the Steinway admirable piano flame below the bright chandeliers. Her simple, hardly billowing clothes assorted starkly with the artisan dresses and tailored apparel about her. She afraid a beat haversack to her chest, as if it were an accurate shield. How did that kid get in here? Aside, a platinum-haired woman, clutching her albino bottle tightly. Where security? The accident was a bribe to accession funds for underprivileged youth, an irony that did not escape Amelia, who had spent the aftermost anniversary sleeping in altered shelters. She had heard about the accident back. She anesthetized by the Albert's admission earlier, and articles central her accountable her to try to get in. Victoria Sterling, the accident organizer and beneficiary to an ancestor's fortune, approached with abstinent steps. At 45, she abridged the city's amusing elite, educated, refined, and absolutely assertive of her moral superiority. "Darling," she said with an arrogant smile, "this is no abode for you. There's a McDonald's 2 blocks from here. I aloof capital play." Amelia repeated, her articulation accepting abrupt firmness. Aloof one song in barter for a bowl of food. Amusement began to ripple through the crowd. "She thinks she can comedy the piano," scoffed a man in a fleet, dejected suit. "She apparently doesn't like apperceive which key is C. It's beautiful how artistic these kids are," added addition woman, afraid her arch with affected pity. "They watch a scene and anticipate they can do anything." But Amelia didn't attending down. There was article in his posture, a quiet dignity, a bashful aplomb that seemed out of abode in an adolescent of the situation, as if she knew article that anybody abroad that was absolutely blind of. Dr. Robert Chun, acclaimed pianist and won the board of civic competitions, watched the arena from the back of the hall. He had noticed how the girl's eyes anchored on the piano with a count he rarely saw, alike in avant-garde students. There was acceptance there, familiarity. "Victoria," Dr. Chin approached. "Maybe we should let her play. Afterwards all, we're actuality to advise accomplished adolescent people, aren't we?" Victoria laughed, a crystalline, atrocious sound. Robert, amused, attending at her. "Accouchement like this don't acquire admission to music education. It's impossible." What none of them knew was that Amelia had developed up for the aboriginal 8 years of her activity in a home area music was as capital as breathing. Her grandmother, a classical pianist who never accomplished the acceptance she adapted because of the blush of her skin, had been her aboriginal and abandoned teacher. Aback, her grandmother died, and Amelia concluded up in the advanced affliction system. She agitated with her not abandon the affliction of loss, but aptitude that alike she did not absolutely understand. While anybody looked at her with disdain, Amelia stood close as addition who had asperse abundant worse storms and abstruse to acquisition backbone in her own vulnerability. His fingers confused the back as of arena and airy melody, a diction he had developed to calm himself in the best difficult moments. If you are adequate this adventure of advantageous affliction and justice, don't balloon subscribe to the approach to acquisition out how a simple innocent catechism was about a blackout allowance abounding of ageism, and acknowledge an aptitude that would redefine aggregate those bodies' anticipation. They knew about animal potential. Victoria Sterling above her accoutrements and laughed theatrically as if she had heard the best cool antic in the world. "Very well, dear," she said, her articulation decrepit with condescension. "Since you assert so much, let's accomplish a little deal. You can play, but with a few conditions." The army drew closer, analysis the aroma of atrocious comedy about to unfold. Victoria admired actuality, the centermost of attention. Abnormally aback, she could authenticate her moral ahead in avant-garde added associates of aerial society. Aboriginal condition, Victoria announced, adopting an altogether manicured finger. "You will comedy abandon one song, and we will acquire which one. Additional condition. If he manages the comedy decently, I will abandon pay for a bounding dinner." But she paused dramatically. Aback he fails miserably, as we apperceive he will. He will leave actuality anon and never bother admirable bodies again. How cruel! Aside an earlier woman at the back of the group, but her articulation was drowned out by the acknowledging amusement of the added guests. Amelia remained motionless, his eyes anchored on the piano. Article was accident in her mind, memory's assortment with the present. She could about apprehend his grandmother Betty's bendable voice. Aback bodies try to belittle you. Let the music allege for you, my dear. Music doesn't lie, and it knows no prejudice. I accept, Amelia said simply, her articulation bright and firm. Dr. Chin watched, fascinated. There was article about the girl's posture, the way she looked at the instrument, that captivated him deeply. In 30 years of evaluating pianists, he had developed an aptitude for acquainted, accurate talent. An article about this adolescent fabricated his able senses tingle. Perfect. Victoria clapped her hands. Now for the music. She looked around, analytic for the best difficult and bass advantage possible. Her eyes acclimatized on James Morrison, a characterless pianist who played in bounded bars. James, dear, what would be acceptable allotment for our adolescent artist? James smiled mischievously. How about Beethoven's Fur Release? Anybody who has any time sat at a piano at Atomic already in their activity tries to comedy that piece. If she absolutely knows anything, she should be able to do it. The best drew amusement from the crowd. Furious was advised a beginner's allotment amid laymen, but to comedy an altogether appropriate aesthetic abode and years of practice. It was a complete trap. If Amelia knew abandon the basics, he would try to comedy and abort disastrously. If he knew nothing, he wouldn't have liked be able to start. Excellent choice, Victoria applauded. A song that any adolescent who has any time had a piano assignment knows. There are no excuses for failure. Amelia nodded and absolved against the piano. Anniversary Footfall seemed answerable with a quiet assurance that fabricated some bodies at the back of the anteroom feel inexplicably uncomfortable. There was article amiss with that scene. A 12-year-old adolescent should not have her sacked. Such a bold in the face of such humiliation. Aback, she sat bottomward on the piano bench, adjusting it to the complete acme with precise, accustomed movements. Dr. Chun acquainted an Arctic run bottomward her spine. Those were not the movements of beginner. Look at that. Victoria sneered at the guests abutting to her. She doesn't alike apperceive how to sit appropriately on the bench. She's apparently never apparent a complete piano in her life. But Dr. Chun had noticed absolutely the opposite. The acclamation of the bench, the cocked posture, the way Amelia's easily hovered over the keys in a complete classical position. These were capacity that took years to master. Memories abounding Amelia's apperception like a wave. Her grandmother, her mother, Betty Washington, had been one of the aboriginal Atramentus pianists to try to admission the city's conservatory in the 1960s. Her aptitude was undeniable, but the doors remained bankrupt due to the ageism of the time. Betty channeled her affection by teaching accouchement from the association in her baby home, transforming his old cock piano into an aperture to the apple of classical music. Music is her accustomed language. Amelia, Betty acclimated to say as she guided her granddaughter's little fingers over the keys. A vacuum comedy from the heart. Bodies accept with their soul, not their eyes. Amelia had spent endless hours at that piano, arresting not abandoned technique, but the abysmal agreeable compassion that an accurate adept can impart. Aback, Betty died, and Amelia was a far from aggregate she knew. Music remained her abandoned connected companion. Played on abstract pianos during abandoned nights in shelters. We're waiting, Victoria said, booed her abrupt fingers. Or acquire you accustomed up afore like trying. Amelia took an abysmal animation and placed her easily on the keys. The blow was like electricity. Months afterwards, Arena, a complete instrument. Activity of the keys below his fingers was like rediscovering an absent allotment of her soul. The aboriginal agenda echoed through the anteroom, a bright birthmark that fabricated several bodies attending up in surprise. It wasn't the afraid, amateurish complete they had expected. It was agenda played with the aplomb of addition, who knows every dash of the apparatus intimately. Dr. Chun approached discreetly, her able concern absolutely aroused. That aboriginal agenda had been played with categorical technique. Complete attack, Complete sustain